All right, we are on topic 6 now, and which is crime deviance and social control. This first video, we're just going to define and talk about the concept of deviance. And that's kind of why I had you do the introductory, in the introduction in Bright Space there, I asked you to make a list of people who you think are deviant. And then I also asked another question, what about you might land you on someone's deviant list. But at least if you can come up with a list of people who you feel are deviant, uh, I'll come back to this and get you to label and use these as examples of different things in our conversation here. And actually, I'm just gonna uh, I'll come back here when we get to those points, but I'll just kind of add in one here. So I'm going to add in my list. Might start with my one of my neighbors, and uh, I have a neighbor. I have many neighbors, but one of my neighbors, there are constantly and always and multiple really big bronze statues of animals, and they change and over time. And but I can recall there's being like huge, like 10 feet chickens and pigs and horses and buffalo. And it's not just one. There's multiple ones all around their yard. So in my mind, to me, that makes my neighbor very deviant in that regard. So, again, take a few minutes here and make a list. And multiple examples. I'm sure if you think about it, there's, when you think of someone, deviant comes to mind, and so have that list handy as we go through the lecture here. Now, with this example, I didn't make this up myself. I actually got it from a sociologist, actually way back in the 1960s, and this sociologist was also an instructor, and they did this exercise in their classes, and they did it year after year after year, and this researcher, his name was, or this sociologist, his name was Simmons, last name was Simmons, uh, and his research and looking at the lists that his students would create year after year shows him that there'll definitely be certain responses here that predominate in exercises like this. So always, like virtually all of the time, these lists or any individual person's list will include criminals, people who commit crimes, and that might just be like us generally, criminals we consider to be deviant, or a specific criminal who has, committed a crime. More often than not, Simmons found that people would list violent criminals, on their deviant lists there. Uh, Other thing, certain responses predominate in exercises like this. So on the list, people who perpetuate injustices, and I don't have time to write all of that. So people who commit injustices of various sorts. So someone who is, for example, racist or sexist, or someone who commits emotional abuse against other people. Again, many people's lists will include, specific examples of people who do that. And so those two, these two, again, always, and so maybe on your list, you'll have one or both of those. Simmons also found that in doing this, and year after year, when he looks at the list in total, there was usually considerable consensus among people about who the top 3 or 4 types of people that are deviant are. But beyond that, what Simmons found was that perceptions of deviance become as diverse and different as the people who are making those lists. So where we'll have general, like a couple of general categories we all likely would have on our list, the rest of the lists are just specific and unique to you, whoever is making the list there. So anyone the person dislikes or is annoyed by, will likely end up on that person's list there. For instance, I've done this a few times in the past teaching this class, and I've had, classmates who twirl their hair as a deviant listed by someone, people who don't hold open the door for you, country singers, or teachers who wear too much beige, could be examples, that show up on individual lists, of just one person. So this raises the question, in a sociological study of deviance, it raises the question about what is deviance. And specifically, it raises the question of whether deviance refers to a label that each of us can attach to those particular people who we disapprove of or are annoyed by or just don't like, or is deviance a label that refers to something at a broader level of social processes and definitions. So sociologically, we have to make the case for the latter, or the second point there, that deviance and defining deviance is part of the social structure and social processes. Deviance is not about people who I personally disapprove of, but rather it's about characteristics of the broader society and social cultural practices. This is just because I personally, thus, just because I personally might not like country singers does not mean that country singers are deviant in Canadian society, or even more narrowly within Alberta society. So studying deviance requires moving beyond individual beliefs and instead analyzing the broader social processes that occur in the society in which you live in. With a topic like deviance, the most important social process that we're looking at here is this process of social control. And we define social control as the various ways in which members of social groups express their disapproval of people and their behavior. So social control can be as mild as just name calling, or ridiculing someone, or ostracizing and isolating them from the rest of society, or incarcerating them in prison, all the way up to sanctioned, murder, like killing. So the study of deviance is about ways of acting and ways of being that within particular contexts and in particular historical time periods evokes some form of social control. So when we look at the dictionary definition of deviance, there we go. Deviance is it's straying from or going against accepted rules or accepted norms, or any behavior, value, belief, condition that violates cultural norms within the society and group where it's occurring. So if you violate a norm that has been accepted and created by your society, you will face a sanction. We learned about that in the culture topic here. And sanctions are a part of that process of social control. The sanction is issued, punishment is issued to try and remind people to don't break the rules and to follow all the rules in that way. So deviance is ultimately a violation of a norm, expected rule for behavior. So one thing I'd like you to do then is to go back to your list of deviants and see if you can identify for some of them. So what norm might, what rule might each of them be violating? So if you had a criminal, and like a specific criminal on the list, obviously the norm that they've broken is a very formal norm, which would be a law. So a murderer, violates the norm of thou shalt not kill other people, which we have written into our Criminal Code of Canada. And some of the items, like I was saying, that Simmons found, sometimes it's just people who annoy us that end up on our deviant list. But even so, play with that. So my neighbor, it mildly annoys me. It actually doesn't annoy me. It amuses me. The animals, the bronze statue animals in my neighbor's yard, they're the only one with these sorts of things in their yard in my neighborhood, and likely I don't even know other neighborhoods might probably don't even have someone like that. So they are deviant, and when I think of kind of what the norm is that they're breaking, is we have really informal rules about what our yards should look like. And there are normal things that uh, we expect to see in someone's yard. We expect to see, trees, if and bushes and flowers, gardens. I live on an acreage, so my our yards are rather large, which then helps to make my neighbor's situation make sense. If a house, again, then what's normal in a yard, if that household has children, there might be toys, there might be bikes, playhouses, tree houses, that sort of thing. Those are all normal. So those, and by saying normal, you're calling attention to there's rules of what's appropriate and not appropriate. So my neighbor is legitimately deviant, and it's not normal to have, multiple bronze, huge statues of animals. I think there was an alien one time too. That's not normal. So they're breaking kind of the rules about an appropriate and respectable, or tidy yard, and in that way, that's the rule that they are breaking. So try and do that for your deviant list. What rules is each deviant breaking there? Okay. Now, as norms or rules exist to govern more than just our behavior, there are therefore different types of deviant behavior. So three general types of deviance that we have. We have what's called behavioral deviance, which is just that. It's behavior and conduct that people engage in. So again, thinking in line of this topic of deviant and people who are deviant, a person who drinks too much, that would be behavioral deviance. Someone who engages in gambling is a deviant. Laughing at an inopportune time, inappropriate times, that's behavior that is deviant. Violates the cultural norms that we shouldn't, in terms of there's proper places to laugh, and proper and places when it's inappropriate. So behavioral deviance, deviant beliefs. It can be argued that rules exist about what we should believe. So, for instance, beliefs that aliens have landed is a deviant belief. Some people believe it, the majority of people do not. The belief that having children is a waste of time is a deviant belief within our society, especially when you consider some of the expectations about what it is to be a family, or even a woman. Women are still socialized today to be that they're one thing they should be doing, and is having children. And so a woman or a family that does not want to have children is a deviant belief. The belief that we need to violently overthrow the federal government is a deviant belief as well. All right, deviant beliefs, behavioral deviance, and then lastly, we have deviant characteristics or conditions. So this, another way where this would be physical deviance. So there's rules in our society about how people are supposed to look. So that can be anything from, someone having a disability, a visible disability. There's an argument to be made that racial differences are it's a physical difference that when you're in a society where some racial groups are in the minority, that can be a deviant characteristic. Um, Other examples of deviant characteristics or conditions, uh, body size, physical attractiveness, where being ugly or physically unattractive would be deviant within our society. Any, sometimes some forms of how people adorn their bodies, someone with tattoos or tattoos all over their body, or piercings, certain facial piercings, for example, that also would be a deviant characteristic. So again, going back to your list here, it would be, see if you can label for the deviants that you have listed here. So what the norm is that they violated, and then you could also, if you wanted to, like the social control aspect to this is, if they've broken a norm, what's the sanction that is issued then if they have truly broken a norm? So that's easy, with the criminal one, if you break a law, you could go to prison, or you could be charged with given a fine. That's a sanction for breaking that norm. My neighbor, again, they have broken a norm about what's appropriate things to have in your yard. And the sanction there is very informal. We laugh and we don't laugh at them, we laugh behind their backs, and we make jokes with other neighbors about it. So very informal, and in that particular regard. Other people might not be as amused by it, and so they could maybe they might say some maybe not nice things, and in terms of clean up your yard, this is a disgrace. That likewise also would be a sanction. Okay, so if you've done norms and sanctions, and then the type. So is it a behavioral, is it a belief, a deviant belief, or deviant behavior? So criminal, basically anything that's a crime. This would be a behavioral deviance, because it's someone actually engaging in an action, so stealing something or murdering someone. My neighbor's example here, it would be also a behavioral deviance as well, the physical putting of things in their yard. So do that, see if you can identify the different types of deviance in your list there. Now, a question this is where I would prefer doing this class in person, where we would create a list as a class of a whole bunch of different deviants there, and then I would ask the question, would it be wise to preserve this list of deviants forever and always, or would we suspect that, say, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, would other people create the exact same list of what is deviant or who is deviant? And it's kind of a rhetorical question, because no, of course not. And so we know that deviance is relative, in that it's always changing, and it's dependent upon unique social circumstances of the time. So deviance is relative means that an act becomes deviant only when it's socially defined as such. And we know that those social definitions change, and those social definitions are going to vary. They're going to vary from place to place. So one society, one culture is going to have different definitions of what is normal and what is deviant. Definitions of deviance are going to vary from group to group, even within the same society. So say Canadian society, different groups within society might have different definitions of what is deviant and what is normal. And the definitions of deviance are going to change from time to time. Um, Social societal definitions are going to continually change, and that's just because everything in that society is changing, all throughout time. And I'm just going to also, I'm going to draw on here once more just really quickly. This takes us, right back to that beginning, when we were getting oriented to what sociology is, and in particular, C. Wright Mills's sociological imagination, where I drew this really sophisticated image for you of, understanding the individual. So at the center of our image here, the individual within a particular society or social structure. That's this sort of buffer around them. And within that social structure are beliefs, are norms and sanctions. So that's what we're playing with here, is in terms of the socially constructed definition of what is normal and what is deviant in our society. But the other component of this sociological imagination is the time period here. And so this is this is specific here because the particular social structure is going to be unique to right now, 2026, but this is going to be a very different social structure 20 years in the future. Likewise, today's social structure and norms and rules and definitions of deviance are different from what they were, say, 50 years ago. So for instance, where I got this activity about listing deviance, which was done in the 1960s. In the 1960s, that sociologist Simmons, he collected the students' lists of deviance that included people who were homosexual on the list, career women who wanted to go and get a profession and have a career. That was deviant for many people in the 1960s. Artists were deviant in the 1960s. Girls who wore makeup, also deviant in the 1960s, and people who were divorced were deviant in the 1960s. So arguably, we've changed, and many of those no longer are deviant. And so that list changes from time to time. I mentioned tattoos earlier as a deviant characteristic. Tattoos, for quite a long time, it was very, you were seen to be deviant and different if you had a tattoo. Now that's very common, for young people to have tattoos. That was actually one of the really interesting differences I noticed when I moved here to Alberta. And previously I was in Ontario, Kingston, Ontario, and teaching at Queen's University. Very different student population in Queen's University in Ontario and the Red Deer College, as it was here when I came. It was just, I saw way more students with really amazing and beautiful like arm sleeve tattoos or leg tattoos, and a lot of them were female students, and so I just did not see that in Ontario at that particular time in that particular setting. So again, another example of how deviance is relative. The definitions of deviance are going to change time to time and group and place to place. Now, lastly, deviance is relative because deviant behavior is going to vary in its degrees of seriousness. And I kind of already covered that as well. The sanctions against the violation of the rules are going to vary from being very informal to very formal. And the more serious norms, we know, we've covered this, are going to come with more serious and harsher sanctions. Most serious norm violations arguably are crimes. Or I guess maybe even more than that, anyone breaking taboos would be probably the most serious there. But again, and we're looking at crime in more detail here, but a definition of a crime is an act that violates criminal law, is punishable with fines, jail time, and other sanctions. So because deviance equals a norm violation, deviance exists only when it is created by society through this process of definition. And in this way, we have what are called dominant moral codes of a society, which serve as the foundation for determining who or what is deviant. And that dominant moral code is, again, a part of the social structure here. It's a socially constructed list of appropriate expectations and rules for behavior. It's important to remember that society's dominant moral codes are shaped by the interests and the actions of some groups within that society that ultimately have more power than other groups in society. So an example here, arguably people who are homeless would be defined as a deviant in our particular society. They're deviant because someone who's homeless, that's a deviant behavior in that, this person, for whatever reason does not have stable housing. That is deemed to be not normal. There's deviant characteristics associated with being homeless as well. And so this is, a definition, but given the power of some people in society, not the sanctions and sort of the punishments for that, enforcing this sort of rule that thou shalt not be homeless, has some really real consequences. So for instance, and I've got examples here of these probably would be, well, I guess the first sign is a property owner, sign put up a building supposedly by a property owner that no person shall sit, lie, or sleep in or upon any street, sidewalk, or other public way. And same thing here, signs telling people they can't camp. So created by a city, looks like Fort Lauderdale is the sign there. So governments, enacting these rules, are enforcing the norm of, one, should not sleep in public places. But when people don't have any other choice or resources to do that, they then become susceptible to punishment and arguably harsher punishment. In the case of violating these rules that you can't sleep in public places, people are typically ordered a fine. They have to pay a fine. But when you think about it, someone who is more apt to sleep in the streets or in public places, they likely don't have the money to pay the fine. But what happens when you don't pay fines is then you might then be placed into prison. You might be, sentenced to jail in lieu of paying the fine. So this is a way to control control a group of people. And in this case, arguably, you have to ask how is it hurting, society or other people to have people who are, again, have no choice but to sleep in public places. Why should it be punished in this particular way? But it's a dominant moral code that some people and some groups feel that it's unsightly to have people who are homeless and visible to the rest of us, and therefore that's why they take these particular measures and threaten these particular sanctions. So one reason why some groups succeed in changing the perceptions and laws and others do not is a distribution of power and resources in our society. So this is that critical perspective we've been looking at all throughout this course. So critical theories, this is their area of study. Critical theories argue that the activities, particularly of the poor, lower income individuals, are more likely to be defined as criminal than those persons from middle and upper class backgrounds. People with economic and political power have the power to define as criminal any behavior that they want, and usually it's behavior that threatens their own interest, or they just don't like. They use the law, and in this way, kind of criminal law, to control those without power. And we call those people moral entrepreneurs. And they can include any group of people. They can include, just wealthy people, the media, religion and religious groups, scientists, politicians, but groups of people who take action to try and ensure that society's, moral codes and the norms reflect their interests and their definitions of what is deviant, and therefore what is inappropriate behavior there. And they take action to try and influence and change the development and enforcement of our moral codes, which sometimes get written into the law, like the Criminal Code of Canada. All right, so with that, I'm just going to jump ahead to the journal question to end out this video. Whoops. We'll come to that in a minute. All right, so for your journal post here, you have the requisite first question, that is anything in this topic that you can use to discuss the current issue or event that you selected earlier in the term, and just use that to, is there a way you can understand that issue a bit better, an example of a concept from this part of the course that plays out in that issue or event. And that for this content, for this video, that's the only question that you could probably answer at the moment.